Yes.
Okay, we are live. This is Family Law. It's January 31st, and we are talking about some things, and we'll talk about more things later. Like that. That was general. We're on here like, there's my fingers. Okay. Anyway, let's talk first about recapping on I think it was chapter 2's material, but it's about basically premarital agreements, cohabitation agreements, postnuptial agreements, right? All that stuff. So I had you do something with cohabitation agreements. What I really wanted you to do was tell me, what are the things you think are important in that agreement? You all drafted one. That's good too, because that's a good way to structure it. What do you want to know? What do you want to agree or have each other talk about before you enter into this roommate agreement?
Money.
Okay, what about money?
How it's going to be separated. How we're going to break it up, pay utilities, what party is responsible for the rent or mortgage.
Okay, how are you going to separate the money? The bills, right?
Car insurance.
Your insurance. So all these things about money, right? That's important. Okay. What bills? Michelle mentioned that bills are split 50%. Okay. Okay, that's pretty good. Anything else? Like, what did you think that you really want to know, like, as you're entering into this situation? I always think of some of the stuff from Big Bang Theory. Honestly, there's some good ones in there, right?
Like who if the parties decide to split for whatever reason, then what party is going to reside still at the house, and who's going to leave, and who's going to take what, and also if you both decide that you put equal pay in 50-50, then the property should be split.
Because that always works out well, right?
Yeah.
Just to sell it.
I think it's important.
Okay, so those general bills, and then you have, like somebody mentioned online here, you guys can say it, I guess, past debts, who gets to keep the cohabitated home, I don't even know how you say it,
Right.
the place that you live,
The
right?
love nest, the love shack. Oh gosh, Patricia.
Not the love shack. Okay, so the place that you cohabitate, who gets to keep it? If it's an apartment, if you own it. Okay, what do you do? I think a big one, yeah, dog is important. The big one is really, I think a big one is past debts. What happens when you cohabitate with your money? I mean, what happens to your money?
Should keep separate accounts.
You should, right? Do you? Not necessarily, right?
It becomes joint.
It becomes kind of joint money because, like, okay, if I enter into a roommate agreement, not with somebody who is my significant other, right? I move in, am I going to share all the stuff? Not all of it, right? Some things. We're going to, like, have the bills that come in, the utilities, but we're even going to kind of complain about that, right? What makes you complain about utilities? So I move in with somebody else. There's two of us. We move in. What might make me worry about the utilities, particularly like water, electric? Oh, Brian got it. They take an hour shower, right? But every light's on. They like it to be 180 degrees in the house, right? So you start to worry about utilities then. Should you split it 50-50? You still think so?
It depends on who uses what.
It could. So if you enter a roommate agreement, we're not talking about cohabitation type. It is in a sense, but we're not talking about a significant other. We would worry about those things, right? You take long showers. You like more cable package, right? All that kind of stuff. I don't. Do I really split that 50-50? In a roommate agreement, maybe not, right? We may split it. We may not have a much issue. If we enter it in with a significant other, what's our position?
I think if you're forming a family unit, because that's really what a relationship like that is.
Right.
It should be split 50-50.
Right. Are you more likely to think that that's natural in a
Yeah.
more of a family unit? Sure. Because you pool your resources, right? That's part of the reason you're moving in together is to pool your resources.
I still think you should have separate accounts.
Right.
But like I put in mind that there would be like a savings. We have separate accounts. There's a savings account that's joint that you both would put money into, and then an account for like bills and stuff like that.
So you have a shared account for purposes of sharing in those expenses, but you maintain your own bank account.
Like a home equity line?
No, we're not borrowing money.
No,
We're
but I
talking,
mean,
that's
For
what,
the sake of accounts, like a home equity.
no, you can have a joint account for that, and then your income comes into your separate account, right?
But you can make payments to your separate account.
Their specific bills are getting pretty specific.
Xbox.
You always go. You pay for your own Xbox.
That's right.
Xbox is your own account, Ryan
That's right.
and Michelle.
I spent more on domestic expenses.
Right. But I mean, there are all those little factors because you know what breaks down relationships the most, really? What they find? Dollars.
Yeah, it's true.
And it isn't necessarily that you like the money itself, but it's like prioritizing it. It's money behaviors. Isn't that weird? It's like that's the biggest downfall in most relationships is money behaviors. You know that some people live paycheck to paycheck. They go on shopping sprees. The other person is very conservative with their money. This guy is like that. Okay? So it drives me batty to spend on frivolous things. Right? So that's a source of friction, potentially.
Yeah. So having your own separate accounts really frees you up where if one of you wants to purchase, whatever you want to,
Blow it on.
do that
Junk.
with their money.
Yes.
And the other person, if they just want to, save their money and not really spend it that much, they can keep their money to themselves.
But that's a fool's bet, isn't it? For the conservative person, the one that's conservative with the way they spend, it's a fool's bet, isn't it? Their bank account keeps getting bigger, and then the other one spends down theirs all the time. Who has to pay most of the bills? Right? Who ends up paying those extras? Who has the vacation account? Who wants to have nice fish for dinner, or who wants to have cheap hot dogs? Right?
Hey, you're hurting me over here.
But you get the point, right? So shouldn't you resolve that up front? Yeah. Do we do that? No. Okay. So anything else? Like so it said like if we both come in and we decide to split up and we both really like the house, we have to sell it. Is that a good result? Okay. So if you add children to the mix, it becomes more complicated, right? We know that. We see that in divorces because what we're dealing with is really a divorce agreement before you're married and before you're really living together. Are these easy conversations?
No.
Are we even going to have them?
I had that conversation the other night. I made him help me. And he was like, this is really cool. I think there's my roommates next to me.
Absolutely.
I'll write it for you. I was like, oh,
It's good. You should do it.
he said, I don't ever want to do this. He said, I think there'll be no enforcement.
If we would talk, yes, because you'd have fewer instances of marriage. I agree. Because we don't think of it that way, right? If we go to, we're going to move in together. Here's the key. Awesome. We're like, this is great. We're not thinking of these potential problems. Unless we've been burned a few times, then we start doing it, and we're still doing it anyway. We're like, whatever. That was that time. That was that 10 times. Right? I've done that with roommates. I don't have to like these people. Right? And I still do it. That was a weird way to put that, but I don't have to like. Okay. So.
I think that's in Letitia's contract.
Are there
Yeah.
other things that you can think of we should have talked about? We got pretty specific in some accounts and some things. Past debts, if you get out of college and you have student loan debt, that's a pretty big one, right? Because what happens in your commingled funds of any sort, once you move in together, once you're living together, family unit, separate accounts or not, there's some sense of splitting expenses. And some of your household expenses go to your individual student loan debts, right? So you have some money, however you, most of us don't have like a spreadsheet and we're like, exactly $38 a month went to your student loan, right? So like it's hard to calculate it. So how much of what you saved by joining into this household went to your student loan payment, right? You could save money out of it. How do you deal with those debts?
In mine, I put that past debts would become, not shared, but shared. You would both help pay for that. And then at such a time that you dissolve your relationship. There would be like a 6-month period where you still share those debts. And in the 6 months, you're both, the person who actually has the debt has to acquire the means to support themselves and pay their own debt.
Okay.
At the same time.
Okay. That's a good point. I think that makes sense. I don't know how long it might be a difficult
Yeah.
enforcement, right? Because now we hate each other, remember?
Yeah.
Which is why we got it stamped in and we made you do your wax seal and everything, right?
So that's why I think it's important to make these decisions when you are in a good
Happy,
place.
right?
Because you're not going to make such
I
a
agree.
great decision when you're in a crappy place.
That's the weird part. You're not going to make them on either end.
Yeah.
We're too happy on one end and we're too mad at the other. We're mad and sad and all those things together. We don't even know what we are. But we're really bad then, but we're not good at the beginning either.
And like business arrangements, duration of the agreement, and like attorney's fees and costs are also.
Okay, so like the costs of enforcing. Now my marker's thinking. How about anybody think of the fact that one or the other wouldn't stop working or wouldn't work or anything like that? Saw that? What'd you put in?
Oh, I did.
Because I think that's the big part.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have that, this agreement's even more important.
One of my agreements were the drafters agreed to both keep financially stable jobs unless otherwise amended. And then I put the drafters agree to help the other with shared expenses if emergency arises, loss of job, and emergency, etc.
Okay, so you had two parts to it, which that was good, I think. Everybody think that was pretty good language? Yeah, the first one, you're going to amend it. When might you amend it?
Whenever maybe get married or if you have to do it.
Okay, so if you get married, I think we probably are going to have a different, well, we know there's a separation procedure for that called divorce, right? But we might have an amendment that when we get married, we may, when we're anticipating that we're actually getting married. I think I saw in the couple I looked at briefly, mentioned that we do not intend to get married anytime soon, right? We don't anticipate marriage at this moment. We're entering the agreement, but it obviously could happen. We're moving in together probably for that purpose, partly, right? Okay, I don't even know how to language all this. Okay, but you might amend it based on that, okay? You might amend it based on what else? What might occur in this family unit that might make you amend the idea that you're not both having financially stable jobs? Kids, right? So that would be an amendment. You enter an amendment to say, I'm now leaving work to care for the kids, right? Now what are we going to do differently? How do we pool expenses? Who gets what and when, right? Child support's separate from all this because it exists whether you have a marriage or not. Okay, so you can leave that piece out. You don't have to agree to that. But on the other end, you have that you're leaving employment. That's where the palimony things came from, was that you had someone foregoing their own opportunities for that purpose, right? Okay, any other ideas on these areas that you were thinking? Oh, wait, there was a second part to that. The second part was an unanticipated loss of employment. Okay, then what might happen? What was your clause? How do you fix that? That you'd then share expenses, or you'd have to come out with a mutually agreeable?
Yeah, it was,
That's a good point too.
I said, the parents agree to help the other with the shared expenses if an emergency arises.
Okay, so if an emergency, let's say that could be medical, it could be something else. An emergency itself could be, I lost my employment. Okay. As an emergency is usually not voluntarily incurred,
It's not voluntary.
but sometimes these happen. You voluntarily quit so that you did not have to work, because now you got somebody else to take care of the household payment, money aside, right?
That's why I made it agree to keep financial statement.
Right. So you have those issues. That's a good catch. I think that's good. That's important. That's really important, especially if you ever anticipate that one of the people may, voluntarily leave employment because of some other family need or whatever. Okay. Any other things you can think of?
I did the business arrangements part because I actually own my own business.
Okay. So you have some ownership interest in a business. You want to deal with that up front. Okay. Because why?
Because my business that I started, and I wouldn't want, basically I put that I'm the sole proprietor and owner of Storyteller Publishing, and that the other party, is not a contributor or beneficiary of Storyteller Publishing, gain no rights to the company through this agreement, and agrees not to seek any part of this company for support upon the dissolving of the relationship.
Okay. So the underlying premise is that you own a business on your own, and now you're moving in with somebody else, and you're wanting them to have no interest in that business, an interest in the sense of financial, I suppose, or decision control. You have no interest in that. That if we split, I keep it all. You don't get any decision making with it, with regard to it, and all those things. Why might we put that in there? Why is that necessary? Seems obvious, right? It's a business. We're not married. You get nothing. It's mine.
2 reasons. I can think of taxes and just to protect your own financial interest. Enrichment.
Okay, so you might get sued over it? Is that what you're saying? I heard enrichment. That's where I got that word.
Well, put it.
How can the live-in partner have anything to do with that?
If they feel like that because of the business that you have and you contributed in any way financially to them, I don't know. I'm just.
Isn't that the weird part? Because in a marriage, we have what's called marital property. So your sole proprietorship, as it grows, by necessity, your spouse has contributed to the financial well-being of your business.
That's where I was.
But now we're not married, but we still have household. The concept remains, doesn't it? That because you take care of these things, and these things, I'm able to spend more time on my business. So, and Michelle points that out too. You put it in the agreement that you have no claim to your other property or business dealings, so your individual property, but you might want to specifically outline what that is, right? And I think that's what Tori mentioned, was that specifically mentioned the organization, the company that she owns. So that's a great point. You want to make it as specific as possible. Okay, so I think that's good, because it doesn't sound like at first like we live together, I own it, why would you get any piece to it, right? Because it's a quasi-marriage. Our law doesn't deal with that well. Why, again, is that true? That our law doesn't deal with that quasi, somewhat like marriage relationships?
At least in the state of West Virginia, on marriage licenses, its required piece says it's a marriage between a man and a woman. So they don't like to, it seems like they don't like to recognize as much the alternative lifestyles that are progressing.
Sure.
So
I mean, West Virginia typically late to the game on things.
Just saying.
That's
I mean,
true.
that could be part of why we don't have laws that are really.
But amazingly, on this issue, West Virginia was before our partner to the other side of the river, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But why does our law not recognize these somewhat like marriage relationships? It's simple, right? Why does our law not really deal with it well? By force, right? Intention. They mean to. Why do they mean to? To encourage marriage, right? To encourage you to get married. That's why we intentionally skip it. We don't help you out because we want you to get married. Why do we want you to get married? Because that's what we did yesterday. Right? No, there's a marriage penalty.
Yeah.
State doesn't care about that though. Feds care about that more. Okay. So the whole purpose of this exercise was to discuss a little bit about these things you might want to include, but realize that this is all stuff you're not going to really. You won't. You just won't a lot. And if you do, it's going to be hard to get your way on much stuff because there's good things, good ideas, but how are you going to convince the other side to do what you want to do? Right? Okay. Anything else? Okay, let's talk about marriage a little bit. Let's talk about marriage. I'm going to share the marriage application. I'm going to share this. There we go.
Sharing.
Here it comes. All right. So I asked you a few questions about marriage, right? So the first thing I asked you is what are the legal requirements of marriage in West Virginia?
You must have fill out the application.
Okay, you got to fill out an application. Where do you go to do that?
Clerk's office.
Clerk's office. What clerk?
And pay a fee. County clerk.
Which county?
Wherever you are.
Wherever you are, just stroll right in. Wherever you reside. Well, what if I don't reside? I'm not domiciled in the state. Can I go to what clerk's office do I go to then? Can I go to that clerk's office?
If you want to elope and you're going to North Carolina, then
No, I'm going to West Virginia. I'm eloping from outside of West Virginia. Where do I go? I don't live here. Can I get married? That's the first question. Can I get married in West Virginia?
I would think so.
I can.
You just have to show them a driver's license. Mm-hmm.
And and I can just go anywhere I want.
Yes, if you want to go get
I
married.
just walk in, I live in Ohio, I walk over and I'm like, here I am. Where do I go? I'm serious. Where do I go? You're not answering. I want to get married.
Courthouse, dude. Go to the courthouse.
Okay, I go to the courthouse. So, which courthouse? There's lots of them.
Downtown.
There are 55,
Downtown.
plus the federal ones. Where do I go? Which one? If I'm in Ohio, I'm an Ohio resident, and I come to West Virginia. I asked you to tell me what are the legal requirements to get married.
Go to the courthouse.
I go to the courthouse, so I just stroll across and whatever one that looks like, and I go to that one.
You don't know, you're just gonna
What's
ask
the
them,
basis of how I decide where I go?
Clerk's office where I do an application for marriage.
So I walk across the toll bridge. Let's say I walk across the toll bridge, and lucky for me, there's this information desk there. These people take your toll, right? So I come up. I was wanting to get married today. Where do I go? Right? By the way, don't walk across that because there's no sidewalk. But I get there and I say, where do I go? I want to get married, and I brought her with me, right? To her. What is that person going to tell me to do?
Go to the courthouse.
Go to the courthouse. I bet they'll help you. Okay, so I stroll down. And I said, where's that? Turn right. Okay. It's confusing. It goes in. Okay, so I go there. Okay, and I walk in, and they're going to say what? Where do I go now? Go to the clerk's office. I get to the clerk's office. And then what are they going to ask me for?
What are you here for?
What are you here for? So Michelle says, you just go to the courthouse. I agree with that. You got to bring your birth certificate. Yes. Oops, I forgot that in Ohio. So I got to go back. Right? Okay. I got to get my social security card or something, some picture from of ID probably. And then are they going to ask me anything else? They're going to let me, by the way, I'm not, what am I getting when I go there? A marriage license, right? I get a license to get married. I'm not married yet. Then you got to find somebody? No, then you got to find who? Then what, who you got to find?
of the peas.
We don't have justices of the
Judge.
peace. We gotta find a judge, right? Michelle says they asked in was this in West Virginia? If you were marrying your
Yeah,
cousin?
it's very
Yes.
specific.
But yes, it asked that. Yep. How close a cousin can you marry?
It can't be first. for sure.
Cannot be first.
Third
It
cousin, once removed.
didn't say anything about.
Second or third is.
Yeah.
It talks about second.
Yeah, I mean, but it's like, you can't,
Am I understanding it right when it says you can't have an ancestor in common ancestor? What is, can you explain?
Yes, you can have an ancestor in
Well,
common.
it said in the statute.
It just can't be closer than. I'll show you here in a second. I'll show you. Okay, so what are the legal requirements to get married? Are there any other requirements? So I can bring anybody in, I'm gonna go in, we're gonna get married.
fill out the application.
Okay, I fill out the form, that's really technical. I just go to the clerk's office, they're gonna tell me what I gotta need for that, right?
And
I get that, I get a license, and I say, I got my license, now what do I do with it? Now you gotta go drive, right?
You have to pay first.
Okay, that was an analogy. You gotta pay, they charge you a fee. I take my license, I gotta go get married now. Where do I go? Okay, we call them the celebrants, okay? Who are typical ones of that? Ministers, usually. We don't have them anymore, but
Someone who is just authorized.
a judge, a law judge, like a family law judge, or a circuit judge, mayors. I don't think magistrates can in West Virginia. I don't know if lawyers, some maybe if you register to do it. In Ohio, like pretty much any executive branch person that's like the top of the executive branch, okay, the mayors, things like that. A boat captain, right? You know that?
Mhm.
That's under maritime law. If you're captain of a ship, you are the law, so you can marry people.
Grandparents got married on a bridge.
So like cruise ships and things like that. Okay, so you get all those things. Okay, what else? Is there any other things you need to know? So we talked a little bit about our bloodline. We can't marry people within our bloodline.
You have to be 18 to just do it, and then you
Okay.
can be as young as 16 as long as you have your parents' permission.
But it has to be written.
And there's like a 3-day period of
Cooling off
going
period,
on.
more or less.
And then apparently, you can get married younger,
Yes, you can.
but you have to
If
have
it's
your
in your
parents'
best interest.
permission and a judge approves, has to approve.
Okay. So where do we find this? We find this in chapter 48, article 2, and we come down, there's the application, there's the technical requirements. But we come down and we see you have to set forth what is your capacity to be married. Well, you have to make the age of consent. That means you're 18. If you're under 18, between 16 and 18, you got to have your parents' consent. Okay? Or your guardian. If you're under 16, you can get married as long as the court approves and your parents approve, and it's in your best interest. In today's world, is that very likely? No, not very likely it'd be in your best interest to be married under 16. Okay? But I'll tell you this, I don't know if I told you this, but my great-grandmother, when she was 14, she got married to my great-grandfather because she wanted to leave home. It was in her best interest, but it was legal at that time to be 14. But she left at age 14 because, did I ever tell you why? Maybe you know why? Because labor law changed and she had to stay home because she was now child labor, and her mom was mad because her mom had to go to work. So she left because it got to be a mad family situation. So she lived to be, I just went to, my grandmother passed away last week, or week before that, but last week I was at her funeral, and we were talking about my great grandma. She lived to be like 2 months shy of 100, so she lived a long time. Anyway, your age of consent. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what we know as consanguinity. And also another word that is related is affinity. Okay, you can't marry people who are too close in consanguinity or in affinity. All right, that's one of your capacities to get married. All right, so what does that mean? What's consanguinity? It means your blood, right? Sanguine is blood, right? That kind of heard that before. Yes, your royal bloodline, right? Okay, so who can you marry? Well, it doesn't tell you who you can, it tells you who you can't. A man may not marry his mother, his grandmother, sister, daughter, granddaughter, half-sister, aunt, brother's daughter, that's a niece, sister's daughter, another one, first cousin, or double cousin. Now, what in the world is a double cousin?
I have a double cousin.
You have a double cousin?
Well, you know, both sides, and apparently that long back in the day.
So they marry each other or
That's how I got
themselves.
double cousins.
Well, double cousin, there's different ways of thinking about double cousins. Double cousins are where siblings marry siblings.
So it's
Okay? That's one way to have a double cousin, but that's not a
not
problem.
Not that kind of sibling. It's not
That's actually not a problem.
two sisters that are not related.
Right, and they marry each other. You can do that.
That wasn't what it was.
That's not what, you can do that. Okay? It makes it confusing, but you can't, because that's, anyway. A double cousin really means either a first cousin once removed or a second cousin.
Yeah, 'cause your genetics are too close.
Yes, that gives me the next question. Why?
Genetics are too close. If you have,
Because, right,
like, children of people, like if, you know, a set of sisters or a set of brothers get married, their children genetically are technically like siblings.
right,
Oh.
right. That's one reason we don't. Double cousin's a little
even
bit
though
complicated.
they're technically cousins, genetically they're siblings.
Right,
I know, right?
which is then confusing, right? Okay, so let's talk about what is a second cousin. Okay, who is your second cousin?
Would that be your parents? It's your cousin who has your cousin who got married and they had kids. But could it also be
Your first cousin.
first cousin?
Your first cousin
My-
kid
My
is who to you? Your first cousin's kid to you is who?
second cousin?
No,
You said second cousin.
first cousin once removed.
Gotcha.
The generation is what that means, removed in generation.
Gotcha. That
Okay.
makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
You can't marry that person.
I always
That's
wondered
not-
that because it just sounds like someone really messed up if you got removed.
Yeah, we remove that cousin from the family, can't marry them.
And then they're twice removed, you're like, dang, you messed up big time.
That's a good point. It does, it's removed in generation. So a first cousin once removed is your first cousin's kid. Okay, who is your second cousin? Well, let's not think about it let's keep thinking about you and your first cousin. Okay, your friends. Your friends.
This is getting really.
You have a kid, and your cousin has a kid. They are second cousins.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's who your second cousin is.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't say who your second, but that's how you determine second cousin. That make sense? Yes?
Yes.
So your cousin, first cousin's kid is your first cousin once removed. Okay? Your kids and your first cousin's kids are second cousins with each other. That make sense?
Yes.
They can't get married.
Yeah.
By blood or affinity, which means by marriage either.
Oh.
So you can't marry a step sibling. Even though the potential of the genetics isn't there, it's too close for comfort. I suppose that's a way to put it. But you still can't if it's by marriage. Okay. So there's sometimes Lifetime movies probably about that, right? I would guess. Yes, I would imagine that.
If you're so to the point of marrying cousins, maybe you shouldn't worry about counting.
Well, a lot of the cousin marriages go back to royalty and the fact you can only marry royals and all the royals are royals.
They had
And
lots of issues too.
yeah, some of them married their moms and stuff. In Spain, did I ever tell you that? In Spain, the Philips, there was a line of King Philips, and by the time they got to the Philip V, they said he could pull his lower lip over his nose
That's disgusting.
because they actually kept marrying their mothers. It was confusing.
How in the world did we get this stigma?
Yeah, how did we?
Oh, I was gonna get there on that. I actually got that.
Oh, no.
I was gonna get there. It has to do partly with common law marriage. That's one reason that was outlawed, is sometimes you were accidentally marrying your cousin. accidentally married, become common law married to your first cousin
Couldn't it be,
or your sibling.
couldn't it be too that back in the day, West Virginia wasn't exactly town central and people lived way back in the hills? What options did they have?
Yeah, a lot of people were common law married in rural areas because it made sense for you to be
That's what
common
I'm
law
saying.
married.
You know, they couldn't travel to town.
That's not why we had the reputation of it all being relative or whatever, you know. I remember there was a T-shirt that said that. But it was like you guys remember that? There was like, it was this picture of the state and it said it's all relative.
Yeah.
I think like Abercrombie came out with it or something.
Like they have room to talk.
I don't know who that fits with. So that being said, I went with it. Okay, do you understand though? Like, so who the first cousins are, who your second cousins are, and you can't marry them. Okay, figure that part out.
Yeah.
Do what? Yeah, if they come.
Did she say? They got Christmas bracket.
Okay, and there's good reason for that, right? There's good reason why you can't do it. It has to do with genetics more than anything else. That's why it came out. Okay, that being said, there's where we are on those things. We ought to move on. Yes, we should. I'm going to jump to the third question I asked you. Can you get married by proxy in West Virginia?
No.
No. Can you get married by proxy anywhere in the country?
Only in a few states.
A few states.
Montana, one of them is the only place you can do it by double proxy.
Yeah, Montana, you can actually get married by double proxy. That's kind of interesting. Neither one of you has to be there. You send your cousin. Right. I mean, there was good reason. Actually, a lot of prison marriages are by proxy.
Yes. And military too.
Military, for different reasons.
Right.
Yeah, in most states you have to. There's 4 you don't have to. So proxy's basically where you're setting it up. Okay, let's move on past that. Is there a Hartbaum statute in West Virginia? There is one. Where is it? We go to 56 and find fleeting in practice.
Back of the chapter, there's a. Yeah, but in the back of this chapter, it was very helpful. There was a link. At the very end.
That's what I was
the
getting.
link.
And there it is. This is the Hartbaum statute.
Oh, okay.
And it basically says that you cannot have a lawsuit. Okay, so what a Hartbaum statute is, it's actually the opposite of what I think you'd think it is. You'd think it authorized you to sue, but it actually did the opposite. It said you may not sue for the purpose of what they call breach of promise to marry, alienation of affections. Okay, so you cannot sue over those things in West Virginia. Okay? You know, there's good reason. We already talked a little bit about why that was, right? Okay. Common law marriage, is there common law marriage in West Virginia? No.
What they do recognize them if you are from a state, like
Right.
if you're from another
That does
state
accept
that does accept common law
As
marriage.
long as what? You didn't do it expressly to evade West Virginia's law on that, right? Because that's marriage by fraud, actually. And how do you know that? There's actually the statute 48.2.101 says that we require a license. You must have a license, and you cannot get married without one. Okay, in essence, that's what it says. So what is a de facto marriage? It's not a marriage at all. Common law marriage actually is a marriage, right? It exists. You can get divorced from a common law marriage and the whole thing, but is a de facto marriage a marriage? It isn't. What is it, though?
Isn't it a marriage for a specific purpose?
I know that you have to,
Uh-huh.
do you have to have a marriage together to have a de facto marriage?
Because they're cohabiting.
Like because you had a child together, it's like you were married?
It could be related in that area. But no, it's not like, it's kind of like you held yourself out to be, it sounds like a common law marriage. You held yourself out to be married, you said you were married, and so for some purposes in the law, we determined that you can't say you're not married. When might that be? Any ideas? when you might want, like, you might want to say you're married, or you say you're not married, I mean. Spousal support.
Right.
That's the main reason. When someone dies, and you might inherit or not inherit. So you don't want to say you're married because you don't want to split it with your spouse, right? But we say that because you're acting like you're married and you're saying you're married, we won't let you say you're not. Okay, for illegal. It's called estoppel in the law. It's a concept known as estoppel. You are estopped from arguing that legally. So you can't make the argument that you're not married because you've taken all the advantages of being married, but you're not. Okay? Understand those things? Yes? Maybe so, maybe not. We don't know yet. Okay. Did I not open that up? Oh, I better put it there. Okay. What'd I do? Any questions about those issues? You're married without going. Okay, so any other questions right now over those subjects? Okay, all right. So let's talk about annulment briefly. I don't know that we got to spend a ton of time on annulment, but what is annulment?
Dissolution.
No.
You're never, you can't.
Right. You were never married. You thought you were, but you weren't. Right?
To your cousin.
You can't marry your cousin. You can think you were, but you can't. Okay, that's an example. Absolutely good example. Okay, so what is annulment? It means you thought you were married, or you did something to think you were, but you're not. Turns out you're not. And really what it means is that your marriage is void, or maybe it's voidable. Okay, what does that mean? What's the difference between void and voidable?
It means it has the potential.
Okay, you have to do something to void it, is what voidable means. Void means it never was good. Okay, so what we look at as annulment is that you can't have an annulment after the fact. It has to do with facts that occur at the time you were married. It's not like something arises after you had entered a validly entered marriage, and then somehow now it's void. That isn't how it works. It has to do with the time that it's there. Okay, why might you want to use an annulment as opposed to a divorce?
Underage. I mean, I know that's one of the reasons. But also, would that also matter as far as assets go? I don't know, I'm asking.
That's a good
Divorce-
question. There's a
divorce
problem.
versus annulment?
I mean, you might want an annulment for that reason. You might want to just say you weren't married at all.
I'm just
I don't know why you want it, other than it usually says some element of fraud to it, right? If there's any reason other than the other big reason, it's because it has some element of fraud, right? What is it? What is really the big reason? It has to do with its origins, right? Why do we have annulments? What is annulment? Who cares the most about getting annulments? Catholics, right? Catholics. Why? Why do they care about getting annulments? Just can't get divorced, but they want to be in some case, right? How did you then you want to marry somebody else? There was a guy, he was really big in history, that had this issue, right? About annulments.
Oh, the king.
Yeah, which one? A particular one.
King Henry.
And Henry, there were more than one. Yeah, the eighth one, King Henry VIII. He's the one who had the biggest issue with annulments, right? He had such a big issue with it. What did he do? Started his own church. I'll be the boss.
Yep.
Right? What did he want to do? What was Henry VIII's real problem? Well, not biologically. What was his mental problem? No.
Well,
What was the problem?
he had a mistress.
Well, he had more than one of those. That's the king.
Oh, heirs.
Oh, he couldn't have a
Heirs.
boy. They were all girls.
It comes down to.
Adultery, that's one of his points.
That's one of the points, isn't it?
Yes, he was not getting a male heir.
Yeah.
So he blamed it on his wife.
And that is actually
He really only spared like one wife, right?
the one at the end outlasted him.
Oh, that's right. So he didn't spare
I read
her.
all
That was two.
But the first one was who? Catherine of Aragon, right?
He
The
divorced
Spanish
her.
one. Yeah, she's the only one he spared, other than the one that outlived him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
The rest of them all
They got
off,
the
lost
axe.
their heads. Right? That was the other way to avoid this whole issue.
So that was like accused them of witchcraft because they couldn't
Yes.
bear him.
He did
Yeah.
and
There are a lot of mysteries around him. Whether or not some of them are true, I don't know.
No.
So why do you want to use an annulment? Because you couldn't get married to somebody else if you were married to somebody now and you couldn't get divorced. She's a spared a mistress who actually did give him a son, but he wanted her sister. So, oh yeah, that was Anne Boleyn's sister, I believe.
Marriage,
just
yeah.
keeping it in the family.
So, yeah, and she did have, yeah, she did have a boy, but then Anne swooped in and won his affections or something. Right? There's lots of good movies, and there's a whole TV show called The Tudors that was about this. Anyway, I'm sure everything was absolutely accurate too. Okay, so why would you use annulment? That was the main reason, really. Its historical origins is religious in nature. That's why you would have it. Annulment means that you basically aren't married, and you what we call, it's a legal term known as relate back or relates back. It means that whenever you issue an annulment, whenever a court determines there's an annulment, it goes all the way back to as if it never existed from day one. So there are some annulments that went on for 40 years. Okay. How exactly do you undo 40 years and say like, oh yeah, we were never married, right? It isn't that easy. So the law doesn't deal with this very well, does it? Can you imagine that? It doesn't work very well. Okay, so let's talk about the two subjects, the void versus voidable. There are basically 4 times when a marriage is void from the beginning. This is less true now, okay? I just want to point that out. I keep it up there. If you notice in the book on marriage, half the chapter on number 3 is about same-sex marriage, okay? It's kind of unnecessary anymore, but the book predates the case, okay? Just so you understand why they put that in there. It's more academic as to why the court granted those fundamental rights and things like that, but gender doesn't make it void anymore in this country anyway. Okay, so just understand that would have, you couldn't, historical marriage was man and woman, so you couldn't enter it otherwise. Okay, a prior existing marriage, we know this as bigamy or polygamy, right? You heard those terms. You can't marry more than one spouse in the U.S. They still say that, there's one state where they say that still goes on to some level, right? But it's not a state-sanctioned marriage. Okay, bigamy, you can't be prior married. Utah, there's still some level. It's not state-sanctioned, though.
No, but they do it.
Okay, we said you have consanguinity and affinity, which means you can't be too close in marriage or blood. And Michelle pointed out Married Sister Wives, which is the show about that. Okay, so that's what you can't be too close in marriage or blood. Affinity being the marriage one. A sham marriage, what do you think a sham marriage relates to? Green card, immigration status, right? You're faking it in order to gain entry to the country. Who knew that when we came in here today that was going to be more of a hot topic at the moment? Immigration, right? Wouldn't have thought that. Voidable is when something you have to take some action to make it void. All right. Usually, then what that means is it's a court order. So the most common one is that you were underage at the time of your marriage. Common, actually, fairly common to lie about your age to get married at one time in history. It's not as much now. I mean, our data, that knowledge base is much higher than it used to be. Used to be all you ever had to do was show your ID to the court or to the clerk, and then you could get married. So your non-age is less of an issue today. But do you remember, anybody seen the movie Liar Liar? Okay. Yes, I don't want to ruin it for you if you haven't, but it's the key point, right? That's the climax of the movie is when, that's the whole argument. Spoiler alert initially. Yes, exactly. So the whole point is that you can't, that you're not of age, so the marriage is void. But the movie's kind of inaccurate because do you think that under de facto marriage principles, under estoppel, she really would have been able to argue she wasn't married. She got all the benefits of marriage, but gets none of the consequences, right? So that seems to be kind of an issue, right? In that case. Physical disability, what is your physical disability that you're talking about? Usually it's a communicable disease, mainly venereal disease. And the other one is impotence. Those are the two main ones. Because what's the purpose of marriage? Historically, procreation, right? So that can allow a voidable marriage. You understand why that doesn't make it void, though? Because you could continue in the marriage knowing full well you weren't going to have children. So it doesn't mean that it's automatically void. It means that you could. I've actually seen a couple of those cases in Wood County of annulment for physical disability. Yep.
West Virginia used to require blood tests.
Yes,
Yes.
And was that part of the reason why?
supposedly. But yes, it held on longer than necessary for that purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to have a 3-day waiting period and it had to do with a blood test. And then we kept the 3-day waiting period, but we had no blood tests.
Back in 1985.
But the point was the general point was to eliminate the spread of disease, just generally. But no, we got rid of that because now we determined that we can know more about the state of our own health and stuff like that. That doesn't mean we do, but it means we can.
Passed out.
Mental disability. What's mental disability? Mainly that means that you were under you lack contractual capacity. But it could mean that you're just like under rose-colored glasses, I suppose.
Can you
That
claim that?
happened to my aunt once. She met a guy, like she was out traveling
Oh, no.
the US and she met this guy and they eloped. I forget where. And she was driving him back to introduce him to our family.
Mm-hmm.
And about halfway through the trip, she realized that he was mentally
Mm.
ill and like was really just looking for someone to nurse him.
Oh,
Huh.
gosh.
Interesting.
So she annulled it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
They
wow.
had him on them.
Interesting.
Poor guy.
So yeah, it was too bad.
Oh.
It was a weird situation.
I was thinking more of like Britney Spears got married to her first husband one night and the next morning decided against it. Or Ross and Rachel from Friends did that too, I believe. Anyway, that was ones I was going on. I love it. You went where yours went is different.
Yeah,
But in any event, you can't. If you have that, you can't be married. If you're a ward of someone else, you can't get married. Okay. Duress is basically when somebody puts a gun to your head and says you have to get married, right? Another way is that that's the concept of a shotgun wedding, right?
Used to
That's
be a thing.
used to be is not necessarily totally accurate. Yeah, it's still out there. But that's what duress is. It could also be, if you remember from our earlier discussions, duress could also be that your whole family's coming in and there's going to be embarrassment. It has to do in those heart bomb type things that's duress too. I mean, you're going to be totally embarrassed. It may end, career prospects and all kinds of things. That would be duress possibly too. Fraud, typically that's where you have intentionally lied about things like whether you have a venereal disease or whether you are impotent, right? That could be fraud. That not whether you're rich or poor or some of those kind of things. But I think the book points out there was a show, and I remember it was called Who Wants to Marry a Millionaire? And it turned out the guy he wasn't liquid in $1 million. He only had like assets worth $1 million. I thought only is a great way to put that. It turned out that part of the agreement, that was the part that caught the news, was that he didn't really have the $1 million. Turned out what it was is in the contract he had to agree that he'd never had a domestic violence history, and he did. And so she was able to annul the marriage. Probably not the best way to go about a reality show. I mean, I get like The Bachelor and that kind of stuff, but like they got married at the end of the show. Like they did that and then they were married. I suppose you probably could have annulled it anyway, or be granted an instant divorce. But anyway, get the idea. Actually, generally speaking, the fact that you lie about how much money you have isn't the reason for an annulment. You know, I've heard people say that, you know, for richer and richer, right? You know, you left out the poorer part. I don't know. You could lie about it if you want, but that's not really fraud. Can you annul a marriage after death? Yeah, obviously. If it's a void one, it always was. You can determine it. Typically, you can't make it voidable though. You can't make it void if it was just voidable, because you've in essence ratified it. Okay, so you get that point. Yeah, it's not really great here. This how this system is. This screen needs a little bit farther. You don't need to know all that stuff. So capacity, I want to go back and hit a couple points. Capacity, we talked about gender already, but prior to existing marriages, typically we say the last in time marriage is the valid one, and the prior one we have to undo it or something. I don't know, that's kind of a dumb thing because it seems like you're married to the first person, but you can ratify it, I guess. Then there's something called the Enoch-Arden assumption. And I go back to the Brady Bunch. There was a Brady Bunch episode. Did anybody watch the Brady Bunch a lot? Okay. No. You know of what it is, right? Okay. In the Brady Bunch, there was a episode involving, what was the mom's name? She passed away this year. No, Alice was the housekeeper. Carol, good one. I like this little chat thing. Carol, she actually had apparently been married once before to Mike.
They both were married.
Yeah, and then he disappeared. Her husband disappeared on like a ship and disappeared.
Yeah.
Okay, and then many, many years later, he comes back on the episode. That was the episode that we were. And now she was married and had kids. I guess that was dumb. Of course, they were both. Never mind. I didn't think that went through, did I? In time frames today, maybe that wouldn't necessarily be good. Enoch-Arden assumption basically says that if you are gone, we can assume that you're dead long enough that doesn't invalidate a marriage. It's not it doesn't mean you're a bigamist now. It means that we're allowed to assume you're gone, you're dead, right? And that's where my reference to Brady Bunch came in. But you've heard of those kinds of things before. There's a movie that has Brad Pitt in it where I think he disappears for a period of time and the same thing happens, right? Pearl Harbor,
Yes.
right? I don't know if the time frame was long enough for that, but you get the idea. I mean, they came back. You understand now. And they didn't get married. They weren't married.
Someone else's place.
But you get the idea. That's way more complicated emotionally and all that. Consanguinity and affinity. Again, we've already talked about all those things. Intent. We talked a little bit. What is a sham marriage? It's a green card marriage. You're married for the purposes of evading immigration law, right? If basically what this statements have to do with are the less than a 2-year marriage, then they only grant you conditional immigration status. Okay, and then after the 2 years, you have to actually formally apply back to immigration to get it made unconditional, that you truly are married. In other words, they're making you prove a valid marriage.
Can they support you?
Not in your conditional status, unless they determine that you did create a sham marriage. Okay. That's always good stuff. There's always good things in movies about that. Yeah, you know what I mean? And it does happen. Actually, one of the biggest things is that about a sham marriage is that when they ask one question and it's whether that the people have consummated the marriage, that's how they usually get you. Because that catches the people by surprise when they ask the question, and they can read your response, and they usually know at that point, right? If you haven't consummated the marriage, it's not a valid marriage, is what the general concept is. Okay, Michelle points out that sometimes in the military, people get married for the money and medical insurance. So you do that just to fake it. What is that? There's a movie with Kevin James in it, and he marries Adam Sandler's character, they're firemen, right? What's that movie called? That was a sham marriage, right? It was all for medical insurance, right? I can't remember. Chuck and some.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Is that what it is? Chuck and Larry? Okay. Anyway, I now pronounce you Chuck and Larry. That's what's called. Okay. Oh, Michelle's on it. Anyway, that's there. We already talked about these other reasons. Generally speaking, if you violate the technical procedural requirements, it's not an issue. Church annulment talks about what they consider in the church defective consent. It means that if you would have known all the things you could have possibly known about the other person, you wouldn't have married them. And, there was there's a lot of things. You have to actually ask the Pope for that, you have to ask the Pope for an annulment, a church annulment. I don't know if you know that. And so, was it Bobby Kennedy? He applied so many times that they finally didn't grant him his last one. And so then he really got mad about that. And then they wouldn't let him come to church anymore. He wasn't like within the church anymore. And so, kind of an interesting point. But that was a big deal when the Pope came. I think when John Paul II came before he passed. I think that's what it was. They wouldn't let the Kennedys come to the mass, the big mass. And it's kind of interesting because the Kennedys got on the outside of the church and stuff. Anyway, but you actually have to ask the Pope for that. All right. So what are the legal consequences of an annulment that occurs long after a marriage? I think that's really the last important point we have to think about. In history, there's a term we know as an illegitimate child, right? Or a child born out of wedlock, okay? Just the terms have changed. It has bad terms going back in history. But that is almost of no consequence today, in today's thinking. Because we used to actually have separate subsets of law for people who were, illegitimate children. So today, that's not an issue. In other words, you think your parents are married. They're married for 40 years. You get to 40 years, and now all of a sudden you were a separate you had separate laws applied to you because your parents weren't married when you were born. Kind of a weird concept. If the law changed something about you, that would be a big deal, obviously. Today, it doesn't change anything. So legitimation statutes, they actually, for those consequences, they said you were a legitimate child because for all intents and purposes, you were born in wedlock. We don't really care about that today because that's not a thing. Child custody and child support, a total non-issue today, but in history, it was an issue for the same reasons because you didn't have a responsibility to protect a child, to take care of a child that wasn't born in your marriage. Today, whether you are married or not married is totally unimportant when it comes to custody and child support. The law's there. She'll go to family court for it. It's the same kinds of concepts. And so just understand that.
Didn't it matter under common law, especially when it came to royalty and things, when it came to providing for support of legitimate and illegitimate children?
It became particularly important for royalty. Legitimacy, that's where it all comes from. Because whether or not you were in that, and we even talked about that with the Henry VIII's one kid that was born to his mistress, then became his sister-in-law.
Right.
But that was important because then you didn't get royal lineage. Even though you had royal blood, you didn't have royal lineage. You couldn't ascend to the throne and all those things. How that became important and for most of our ancestors' lives is kind of interesting because, I'm sure it had some purpose but really it doesn't today. And I think that's good. That's good news that's not. I mean, because if you had children outside of a marriage and then now nobody has to take care of them, I mean, that's weird, right? So that's not there. Alimony, property division, inheritance, those issues are out there because now do you get to inherit from your non-spouse? No, not by natural statute, not by will. Even a will, when a marriage ceases to exist, even if your will says it goes to so-and-so, my spouse, it doesn't. It automatically terminates that provision. A divorce does, and an annulment does. So unless they specifically name you back after that happens, you're not going to inherit. How do you split up your stuff? Do you get spousal support? No. Maybe under the concepts of alimony that we talked about, maybe you have it there, but probably not. Okay? So those things, the alimony is a bigger issue than the property division. Property division you to get, I think because you can say that it's a legal partnership and you could probably split assets that way. There are unjust enrichment's another way to do it. So you have that. Marital privileges have to do with evidence in court. Okay, so you don't get the duty of confidentiality and stuff like that. And you'll have to amend your tax returns going back 3 years, which would be kind of annoying, but that's probably the smallest issue of any of the other ones. The fact that you don't have an easy way to separate your property is the biggest, I would say, for most folks. Okay, so I didn't tell you what the keyword today was. Let's make it proxy. Okay, proxy is today's word. All right. I waited till right at the end. Any questions about any of that stuff? Don't forget, then, before you get here next time, there's quiz number 1 over chapters 1 through 4. Okay? I'll give you 2 hours for it. How's that? 2 hours. Cover it with tape. Okay, any questions? If not, we'll see you on the next time. Later.